Your Creative Push, episode 278.
Focus. If you don't focus on something, you're never going to get real far in anything.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Jeff Leisawitz. Jeff is an award-winning musician, producer, critically acclaimed author, and internationally distributed filmmaker who has devoted his life to creativity. Jeff burns with a mission to inspire writers, artists, musicians, filmmakers, entrepreneurs, and everybody else to amp up their creativity, heal their hearts, and shine in the world. And his first book, spoiler alert, this episode contains explicit language because his first book is called Not Fucking Around, the no bullshit guide for getting your creative dreams off the ground. And he comes on the show today to talk about that book as well as his overall creative life, his creative mission. And he starts out by telling us his early interest in music, photography, writing, all of the kind of creative things. And then going along with that, the importance of focus when you do have all of those creative impulses, how to decide exactly where to go. He talks about NLP and how it can aid creative people in their pursuits, and also a deeper message of how creativity is a way for us to be seen, expressed, and healed. A very powerful takeaway from this episode. And then Jeff dives in to his advice on how to get past your resistance, or as he calls it, your ick, your inner critic. And he gives us some actionable advice through some of the lessons that he learned from things such as improv comedy, this idea of saying yes and blank, just accepting what life throws at you and just saying, okay, yes, I accept this and let's go with it. And then he gives his advice for how to shift from the fucking around mindset to the not fucking around mindset. It's a simple shift, but it's a tough one to do, and it's one that I think all creative people should be doing. We should be in this mindset of not fucking around. So that's why I thoroughly enjoyed my conversation with Jeff today. He's a guy who really gets it because he has attacked creativity from so many unique angles, and he has a lot of really interesting things to say to help you to get to your own creative passions and to stop fucking around. So without further ado, here you go. My conversation with Jeff Leisawitz. Jeff, welcome to Your Creative Push.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, I really appreciate you being here. I think that your book kind of fits in perfectly with the thesis of Your Creative Push. It's called Not Fucking Around, the no bullshit guide for getting your creative dreams off the ground. I read it and it literally fits in perfectly with a lot of the themes that we talk about on this show. So I'm really excited to have you on.
Fantastic. And again, so happy to be here.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
So I'd like to maybe start out, just kind of give us a brief overview of your, I guess, life, your creative upbringing, and how you got to this point today.
Well, I was always the weird kid. We can
Me
start,
too, my friend.
Start with that one. Didn't really have a lot of friends growing up, was sort of always in my own world, making up stories, a lot of drawing and painting and, just creative stuff like that. Mixing up potions. I was always into that as a little kid. And as I got older, I turned on to music. My parents weren't really into music, but I went to summer camp one summer, and this was like late 70s. And I was a little kid, and the counselor in my cabin brought up the stereo with all kinds of awesome 70s albums, Springsteen and The Who and, Genesis and Zeppelin and Styx and Journey, just like all that great sort of classic rock. I totally turned on to music. So I went home and I was like, I need an electric guitar.
Of course.
Yes, of course. And, that didn't really happen for a while. But eventually my parents bought me this like Kmart, sort of low end, $49 electric guitar. And I kind of went nuts playing until my fingers bled every day after school, that kind of thing. And then I determined that I wanted to be a rock star, which was not quite in my parents' plan for me, I guess.
Yeah.
But pursued music, got really into photography. My grandfather was a photographer and he took me into the dark room also as a little kid. And I loved the magic of watching these pictures appear on paper in the dark. Have you ever done that? Develop black and white film? Yeah.
Yeah.
Amazing. So I got more and more into this creative stuff and, a little bit of filmmaking or video, things like that back then. And also writing, of course. I was always writing stories and poems and things like that. So I just kind of kept pursuing music, got into music for film and TV, won this big award, Best Independent Electronic Artist in the World in 2000. I was like, oh my God, this is really going to happen.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah, that's what I thought. That was when Moby was big, and I was sort of into electronic music back then. So I figured, hey, maybe I can hang out with Moby and get some rock going with that. That did that did not quite happen. Although I did get into music for film and TV and had quite a good career with that. Thousands and thousands of placements in TV shows and things like that. So that was all cool. Now with music, I actually teach songwriting and recording at a college, which is, kind of like a dream job, really. If you can believe that I get to teach college students to rock, it's like, wow, that's a good one.
Right.
I've also been a music journalist talking about, during the grunge era, I moved to Seattle. And there was this little thing that nobody really heard of at the time called the internet, right?
What is this thing you speak of?
Yes. What is this thing that we are talking over right now? But at the time it was nothing. And so I got a job working for the biggest radio station in Seattle. And in fact, probably the most prominent radio station in the world at that time, because it had just broken all these Seattle bands to the world. So I got to interview all these bands and all this and that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's kind of that, and the filmmaking, I made a movie, Mystic Coffee, screenwriter, tons of photos. I mean, I could go on and on. But let's just say I've done a lot of creative stuff over the years.
Now, that's like a lot of different things going on, and I think a lot of creative people can relate to that, like having a shit ton of things that you want to pursue. What were some of the difficulties that you experienced, like when you have all of these different kind of creative threads running in your life, sort of narrowing it down and kind of picking one, or did you kind of just take on whatever came?
Well, that's a great question. And, the one word in there is focus, right? If you don't focus on something, you're never going to get real far in anything. And when I was in college, actually, my poetry teacher and advisor essentially warned me of this because she could see it in me, back then. She's like, you're into music and writing and movies and photography. And she was like, pick one. I was like, I love them all. I can't pick them. But the strategy that I did eventually come up with was to pick one at a time, right? So when I'm into screenwriting, I'll kind of cut most of the rest of everything else and just like, I'm going to write this screenplay and then it's going to be done. And then, okay, time to make some music. So let's focus on some music for a couple months or whatever. And in that way, at least you're taking some big steps in each direction before you switch direction. And like for my music career with the film and TV stuff, that was years of primarily focusing on music. And then I sort of switched into filmmaking and screenwriting and that kind of thing. And now, for me, it's largely the book and the workshops and stuff that I do around the book, because I guess part that I didn't really mention in my little bio there is that besides all the creative stuff, I've also always been really big on empowering people and creatives in general. So besides the teaching gig, which I mentioned, I'm also a life coach, right? And I practice something called NLP, stands for neuro-linguistic repatterning. And that is a sort of one-on-one counseling to help people untangle their subconscious blocks to have better lives, the lives that they choose. So putting these things all together really sort of culminated in the mission of this book, which is really where I'm at now.
Well, I'd love to kind of take that point about NLP. very briefly touched on that in this show. Can you dive into that a little bit deeper? What do you learn about people when they tap into their own kind of creative demons and try to reprogram themselves?
Sure. So the first thing that I would say about this whole thing is our psychology, and particularly our subconscious psychology, drives, I believe, probably nearly all of our behavior in one way or another, right? So if these are positive things, then great. And if they're not so positive or not so helpful, can really kind of screw you up. And I think we all know, in our own stories, what these things might be if we're paying attention. So what NLP does is it looks at the belief systems that we've created for ourselves and the identities that we've created for ourselves, generally in early childhood. And then we can sort of untangle those things so that we can decide is this really helpful for us now as an adult or not? And if it's not, how can we change these ideas about who we are and what life is? So again, I use some of those techniques and things in the workshops and stuff like that. But a bigger picture with creativity is, after all this time in the studies, the psychology, and years and years of doing this stuff, I've come to realize that creativity is really a method or a system or a way for us to be seen, expressed, and healed, right, in our lives. And this is big. So what do I mean by that? To be seen in this world, there are so many people running around, right? It is easy to feel like we have become anonymous. You look online, there's zillions of people. There's just people everywhere, right? But even with our friends, families, intimate partners, and things like that, sometimes we feel like we're just not seen. Like, do you really get me? Do you really understand this? So by creating, it is a way to be seen. What do I mean by expressed? To be expressed, in my book, is to go from the potential to the actual. So an example I give on this is like a dancer who's sitting in the corner of the dance floor in that moment is not being expressed as a dancer. As soon as he or she steps on the dance floor and starts shaking it, then they are expressed as the dancer. So the same thing is true, of course, for a musician or a poet or anybody else, right? When you do it, you are expressed. And when you are seen and when you are expressed, that catharsis comes out of you. You are released from the pieces of yourself that need to be expressed and let go of into the world. And this is where tons and tons, maybe even all of great art, great creativity comes from, whether it's a dancer or a poem or even a chef, or puppets or like anything, right? Because the more we tap into who we are and express that, whether it's the joy or the pain, the more that resonates and releases and touches our audiences. When we do that, the creativity that we create becomes the gift that we give to the world. Like the movies and the books and the music that you and I and everyone else has heard that has been so valuable to us. Somebody made that, right? That is the gift that we can also give as creatives. So that's kind of my bottom line on this whole thing.
I love that, to be seen, expressed, and healed. And the interesting thing that you touch on in your book is that the whole being seen part, that I think the creative, the true joy that you can get doesn't really necessarily come from being seen, but it's that kind of fulfillment that you get when you create just for yourself, like with nobody else in mind, just doing the thing without any kind of success afterwards. It's just that kind of daily fulfillment of being able to create and express yourself. And so that's always a tricky part, is that being seen thing, because if you start thinking about being seen too much when you're doing something like kind of a creative expression that's like private, like writing or photography or painting or anything, even music making, something like the whole being seen part comes later.
Mm-hmm. And the truth is, and you totally got that, being seen first by yourself, the true, deepest, and sometimes darkest parts of ourselves. Once you can see that and love that as part of who you are, that's when the world will start to come to you. If you're always pushing yourself to be seen, it's not going to fly, right?
Absolutely.
You have to create with deep truth and authenticity. And then it sort of doesn't even matter if others see you, because the right people will.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I agree completely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, now what about for the people that haven't necessarily tapped into their creativity, or they know that they're a creative person? Maybe they're that dancer that's on the sideline, so to speak, right now. What advice do you give to them as far as getting to their creative passion or getting past? Well, I call them resistances, and you call them the ick.
Right.
So what do you say to those people?
Right. So the ick that you're referring to is the inner critic, which I talk about in the book. The inner critic, I believe, is sort of like the super villain of the creative self, and really of the whole self. It is the part of us that says, you are not good enough, you suck, you're not smart enough, how do you, why are you even doing this, that kind of thing. And this, again, if the ick gets a foothold in your psyche, especially at a young age, it's tricky to do battle with this thing and sort of tone it down. It's never going to go away. We all have it, and it's there for good reasons in some cases. But what we want to do is realize that this is just a voice. It's just fear keeping us down. So by confronting the ick and by letting it know that it is not in charge of you, right? You can free yourself from the expectations of making something great or being popular, selling 1 million albums. When I've got, my students at college, I'll get students who have never written a song before, right? And they come into my class and we do this thing, and they're so worried that their first song that they ever wrote is not going to be, at the level of the Beatles. Mm-hmm. I'm like, come on, relax, just make it and love the process of making it. And the first song you do, I sure hope it's not the best song you ever write, because if you're going to be a songwriter, you're going to be writing songs for the next 30 years, right? You don't do your best one first, and it's not going to happen anyway. So just relax. One of the workshops I do is called The Art of the Ephemeral, where we talk about and do exercises around creating art of various kinds and writing that we then immediately destroy.
Ooh,
right?
Scary.
So I had this teacher in college in like a pottery class. At the beginning of this class, he's like, okay, for this week, go into the studio and make your bowl, on the wheel and whatever. Okay, so we make this thing and we come back the next week and we talk about it. Everybody goes around and talks about it. It's like, okay, come with me. Like, all right. We all go into this other room. It's like this little sort of concrete bunker. It's like, okay, smash it. Like, what are you talking about? We just worked on this thing for a week. He's like, smash it. So all these horrified college students smash their, little creations. And what he was trying to say with this is the art that we create, it sort of is both sacred and ephemeral. Like, just let it go. Like, it doesn't matter that much. It does, but it doesn't. You know what I mean? So, but if you're too wound up with trying to be perfect, just smash some stuff and see how that goes. Like, have you ever heard of these Buddhist monks with the sand paintings? So this is these Buddhist monks get together, and as a mindfulness practice, they take weeks using colored sand to make these mandalas on the floor of their temple. Really intricate, really beautiful. And you can look this stuff up online. You'll be blown away. So they do this for days, weeks, whatever. As soon as the thing's done, they say a little prayer and they sweep it up They
Oh my
destroy
God.
it, right? And, to sort of like the American mind or whatever, you're just like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Like, I worked hard on that. What are you
Right.
doing? But their concept is just let it go. Like, it's all part of the flow and the process. And really, as creators, the beauty is in the creating. It's not really in having what we've created. Also in college, my poetry teacher said, a poet is not someone with a pile of poems on their desk or, poetry degrees or something like that. A poet is someone who writes poems. Like, it's that simple. An artist is someone who creates art, right? It doesn't matter how famous you are, if you're making money or any of that stuff. It's just doing it. So I've always remembered that, and I thought that was really wise.
Yeah, it's something I try to promote all the time. You get to as long as you do something every day, you get to call yourself that thing. If you're writing every day, you're a writer. If you're painting every day, you're a painter. If you're taking photographs every day, you're a photographer. And that's something that people need to get over, because I think so often we need that external permission. We need the community at large or the internet at large to tell us, yes, you are the best writer ever,
Mm.
in order for us to feel like we're a writer. We need a publisher to say, yes, we want to publish your book, or fill in the blank. There's a million different excuses of this future self, which you talk about a little bit in the book too.
Mm-hmm.
No, you don't need like the future world to tell you you're something. You get to tell yourself that you're that thing, as long as you're doing it every day, and you get to convince. You don't have to convince anybody else, because you just are that thing.
Right. And when you do that, that's sort of part of this NLP stuff. You then create a new identity from, oh, I want to be a poet, to I'm a poet. Of course I'm a
Right.
poet. I'm writing poems every day. So check this out. There's this movie last year called Patterson,
Okay.
which is, I highly recommend this movie, especially for poets, but any kind of creative will dig it. It's about a guy called Patterson in Patterson, New Jersey, who's a bus driver, blue collar dude. Normal life, drives the bus, goes to the bar and has a drink, hangs out with his girlfriend, walks the dog. Nothing special about this guy or his life, except he has a little black notebook. He pays attention to the world, and he writes little poems, right? And when he does this, it enriches his experience of his life, because he's looking for beauty and expression, and then creating just a little bit in this notebook. I was so inspired by this movie and this character that I went out and I bought one of these little black notebooks, just like Patterson. And I have now largely been writing a poem a day for close to a year. And it's really transformed my vision of what is poetry. Because before it was like, I want to write poems that, are great and whatever. Now it's like, I just want to write a poem every day, and I'm not necessarily going to publish it. I haven't shown any of these to anybody. It's like, I just want to do it. It's totally freeing, and it's totally beautiful. And, you can do this, of course, sketching, taking a photo. I mean, there's a million ways you could do a practice like that.
Absolutely. It's such sagely advice to have a notebook or have something physical that you put information into, or put a little bit of creative output into every day, and bring around with you, because then it gets your brain thinking creatively, and it gets your brain constantly, like, you live a creative life because you're constantly looking for that next thing to write on the fly, or paint on the fly, or draw on the fly. So it just puts you in a completely magical little universe of your own, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And if you're going to live in the universe, you might as well live in a magical one. That's the way I look at it. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to just jump back to that kind of fear of rejection, like these icky icks
Mm-hmm.
that creep into our life. And what happens when they are real? Like, what happens when you do experience a situation where you're like, oh, shit, like, you were right, inner critic. Like, you were right. Like, I did receive this real world rejection.
Mm-hmm.
How do you deal with that in a normal way, so that you can still kind of deal with that rejection, but not let it overtake your thought process again?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, if you're going to step out into the world as any kind of artist, you will be rejected most of the time. And that is
Yeah.
just the facts. And that's okay. Okay. The trick is to remember that you are not your creation. Okay. This is where people get really screwed up. So when we create a book, a story, a song, whatever our things are, we put so much of ourselves into it if we're doing it well, right?
Mm-hmm.
That our heartbeat is in there. And if we do this, when someone rejects that, we automatically sort of believe that they are rejecting us. And that is not true. They're evaluating the work. They're not evaluating us as people. So, you think of like an accountant. Okay. If an accountant does their job and they screw up some numbers in the books and somebody catches them and, they screwed it up. They didn't do a good job. They might be bummed, but they realize this is my work. It is not the value of who I am, hopefully. Right? So when the world is not appreciative of your efforts, the biggest thing in my mind to remember is they're looking at the work. They're not talking about you. And here's the good news. The more you step forward and the more you get negative feedback or fail in different ways, the more resilient you will be. So there was a guy on a TED Talk that I saw recently. I forget exactly what his deal was, but his thing was, I'm going to fail 100 times or every day for a year or something like this. So he would create these crazy scenarios where he knew he was going to fail. He'd walk up to a stranger and say, "Can I have $100?"
Mm-hmm.
Right? Of course, they're not going to give it to him, but he would engage in it and he would learn from it. And every time he would do these crazy things, he would feel more bold so that when he was ready to do things like look for investors in his company, he would walk up with absolute confidence. Who has $100,000 for me? And he was cool with it. So stepping outside of your comfort zone, understanding that you are not your creation and really separating that, I think are some of the key pieces in moving forward.
Right. It's like those students creating that first song.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary to put yourself out there in the real world, but you do build up that resiliency once you get that first no. And it's almost like collecting no's until you finally do get that yes.
That is a great way to look at it. The more no's you get, the better, because sooner or later somebody is going to say yes. Another thing with that, we're talking about like giving away our power, essentially. I want my photographs to be in an art gallery. I contact 20 art galleries in town to get my stuff there. No, 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 no. Okay. Well, every time you put your power anywhere besides yourself, you're sort of giving it away. So instead of looking for opportunity, which is always good, you can also create opportunity. You want to have a gallery show? What do you need? You need a room, right? A couple walls. Put it up there, promote it, do it yourself. Like there's ways to be creative that doesn't rely on other people, at least to get it started.
Yeah, and when life does give you those rejections or life gives you kind of a situation that you're not necessarily happy about or you don't know how to surmount like a problem, you have this wonderful kind of chapter in your book where you talk about like what you learned from improv comedy, where it's yes and blank. Mm-hmm. So I think that's great advice for approaching life. Maybe could you talk about that?
Yeah. So, I took this improv comedy class a couple years ago, and it was really fun. And it was also really scary because you're on your toes, you're on your feet, and you're in front of a bunch of people. So there's a bunch of sort of not exactly rules, but tenets about how to do improv comedy. And one of them, the one that really struck me the most, was say yes and. So what that means is agree that the reality that exists in the scene that you're creating is true, when whatever it is however crazy it is. And then what can you do to add value to it or move it forward in some way? And if you do this in improv, you can always move the scene forward. It might not necessarily be good, but it will be something. If I say, hey, here we are hanging out, at the bus stop and the aliens just landed. If you say, no, that didn't happen, well, we're kind of dead in the water, right? But if you say, oh yeah, they're green and pink and they're bringing us milkshakes, then we have a story,
Yeah.
right? And then we can go back and forth and develop that. So the same thing is true in our lives. If you can objectively look at where you're at and be like, okay, say yes to this. Here's where I am. I have made a record and I want to take it to the next step. I've never written a song, but I want to write a song. Like wherever you are, just like realize where you actually are. And then that's the say yes. And what can I do to move forward from there? So then you've just figured out and you start stepping forward. It's really that simple within your own world. And then it gets bigger and cooler when you step out, into a bigger scene or a community where somebody says, hey, well, this actually just happened to me the other day. Somebody calls me out of the blue. Hey, we're a dance troupe in New York City, in London, actually. We're a dance troupe in London. We need some music for, our production. I'm like, okay, say yes. And how do I move forward with this? It's an opportunity. It's basically just realizing the opportunities that exist in the world because they're not always obvious too. You got to sometimes look for them or see them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, and seeing those opportunities when they come up or these like kind of random occurrences and embracing them taps into something that you talk about in the book that I have to talk about because I'm in love with the idea that the universe is out to help you, not out to get you. And you talk about how the universe is a reflexive energy system and always kind of trying to pull people together, pull situations together to make everybody happy or make everybody better. And I applaud you for including that in your book because I totally agree. And I think it's a lot of times people think that's like too woo-woo of a thought process. But I think when you do kind of approach the world or this existence with that kind of positive outlook where if I say yes and blank to all these situations that come up, it's going to just make your life that much more amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I am a deeply spiritual and woo-woo kind of guy. But you don't have to be for that to work, right? Because you can believe the metaphysics of the world and you put energy in and random things sort of come to you, right? The universe is supporting you, which is true as far as I'm concerned. But you don't have to believe in the metaphysics and the magic of that. You can also believe in just like basic psychology, which says you will see what you look for. If you look for ways that the universe, that the world is supporting you, guess what? You'll find them. If you're looking for ways that the universe is screwing you, you're going to find that too, right? Yeah. So just on the super basic level, what do you want, right? If you want the universe, the world, your community, your people to support you, well, look for it and believe it. And the more you do and the more energy you put in, I promise you it will come back. It just does. It's just how the world works.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, your book is obviously called Not Fucking Around. And I think that for a lot of people, they have experienced life when they're fucking around and they've experienced life when they're not fucking around. And they know the difference, but they still get trapped in that fucking around kind of mindset because it's so easy. It is so pleasurable to just sit in front of the TV, watch whatever, eat whatever, drink whatever, and not work hard and not kind of pursue those dreams. A lot of times because of the fear of rejection, the fear of the kind of the unknown. What would your like biggest piece of advice for people to get into that universe where they're not fucking around, where they're, actively pursuing their creative passions or actively pursuing the life that they want? What's like the biggest piece of advice that you would give to people to kind of shift that mindset?
Yes, that is my sort of intro workshop and intro chapter in the book. rediscover or discover what you love and why. Okay, so the why is the huge part of this. If you continually ask yourself questions about what drives your behavior, you will tap in to the truth of what powers you in various directions. And when you do that, the energy will automatically appear. Okay. So ask yourself, well, why do I like writing songs? Right? And why? And take that answer and ask again, why? And write these things down too, by the way, because it helps you go deeper. You will get to a point where you understand the value of what you're going to do. And when you do that, you're a lot more likely to do it based on an intrinsic, an internal driver rather than an external one. The external one is, oh, I want to be famous. The internal one is perhaps, I want to be seen, expressed, and healed. And that is a much better driver, and it's going to help you to actually do it.
I love it, man. Well, before we let you go, we like to end Your Creative Push episodes with a final push. And that's where I give you the opportunity to reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions, to stop fucking around and to get the work done.
All right. Create a habit, even if it's small, even if it's 5 minutes a day. Create a habit, because once you choose that habit and reinforce it for about 30 days in a row, it will be more difficult not to do it than it is to do it. Okay, so for instance, with this poetry thing that I've been on for the past year, for a while it was like, oh, I better write my poem. I better write my poem. And now it's like, ooh, I feel compelled to write my poem, which is very different. And guess what? You keep doing that day after day after day. You write song or play guitar, do whatever you're going to do for 5 minutes or half an hour or an hour a day. That adds up. So let me just tell one quick story here. There's a woman I knew who was a mom with 3 kids and a full-time job. Okay. And she wanted to write her novel. She loved writing. She wanted to write her novel. But guess what? She had no time to do it. She, every once in a while on a Sunday afternoon, the husband would take the kids and she'd have an hour or two, but basically she just really wouldn't get much time and energy to do this. So one day she got so sick of it. She said, you know what? I'm waking up an hour early, 5 days a week. I'm going to have my coffee. I'm going to write for half an hour a day, 5 days a week before these kids get up, before all the rest of the mayhem begins. Year and a half later, novel complete.
Boom.
Boom.
Yeah, it's really, it sounds simple. And it does kind of get difficult sometimes. It's easy to throw in the towel, but when you do get that momentum started, you realize that waking up half an hour early or staying up half an hour later or working on your lunch break or fill in the blank, finding some sort of sacrifice to give up every single day. The amount that you can create is mind-blowing. And also, it's like you said, you feel compelled to do it and it's hard not to do it. And
the sacrifice becomes the gift.
Mm.
Quote me on that shit, man. That was a good one.
Oh, we will have that quoted for sure, man.
Tweet that one.
Tweet that one out. I love it. It's the perfect way to end it, man.
Okay.
Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show, for giving us that push, and for helping us to achieve our own creative passions.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here, and I hope you guys got all kinds of good stuff out of that.
Absolutely, man. And you can find Jeff on his website, which is jeffleisawitz.com. That's LEISAWITZ.com. You can get his book on Amazon, but if you head to the website, you can get 3 free chapters. We'll have that all linked up at today's show notes page at yourcreativepush.com/JeffL. Jeff, thanks again, man.
All right. Thank you. Rock on.
A huge thank you to Jeff once again. Perfect alignment with this show, like I told you. He really killed it. One of my favorite stories that Jeff shared was actually that story about teaching music and the students being so scared of making that first song. And that I think that's just something that I can relate to so much. Like basically everything that I've ever wanted to start, any brand new thing that I wanted to create something for the very first time, I've always wanted to make it perfect. I wanted it to be this kind of booming, wonderful thing that was perfect, flawless, that I would look back to fondly years later, that was just this like pristine thing. And I know that a ton of you, probably everybody listening right now can relate to that feeling as well. It's so scary to jump into something brand new, something that you are passionate about, something that you want to learn a lot about, something that you know you need to put experience into, but it's so hard to start that first thing because you want it to be not terrible. You don't want to suck at something. But I think that action is an art in itself. The idea of just jumping in is something that you need to practice. It's not just the actual art that you're creating, that specific art that you're creating. If you're going to create a song, if you're going to take a photograph, if you're going to whatever, the actual diving into it is a art in itself. And it takes practice to get through that fear, to realize that you can create something that sucks. You can go back and redo things. You can get better by practicing and by sucking. It's okay to suck. And I think the more that you do dive into new things or try new things, the more you realize that it's going to be okay. Actually, I have a story for you. I went back into the Facebook group that I joined when I started this podcast to learn how to podcast. It's kind of an educational as well as motivational group for new podcasters. And I saw somebody, I had a question to ask that I got answered, but when I was in there, I saw somebody that when I was like orienting myself over 2 years ago into like thinking about making Your Creative Push, and like one of like, I guess like the members of my quote class, they were like making their announcement that they were finally launching their podcast. And I thought about it and I was like, wow, that's so sad. That's so sad that, you know, here Your Creative Push has, 280 something episodes, and it's over 2 years and we have so many listeners and blah, blah, blah. And I felt sad for them that they were just launching, that they let, who knows what happened in their life, but most likely it was creative resistances, things that maybe they could have benefited from Your Creative Push from. But then I was like, no, like I shouldn't feel bad for them. Like that was the whole thesis of this podcast, was the fact that it took me over 2 years to like do my creative passion. I didn't want other people to suffer from that as well. So it was really interesting to see that in action. And, you feel bad from the outside seeing somebody that's struggling to create something new, but that's what you're not going to struggle with. That's the whole reason you're listening to this show, is so that you can push through those resistances, so that you can get to your creative passion without thinking about those resistances, without thinking about those icks. And so you can just get to your creative passion. Like I said, it does take practice. It does take some sort of not caring about what anybody else thinks. And you can always go back and do your episode 0, like I did, where I just realized how much I sucked when I started, and that the fact that it needed to be fixed. But it also, looking back, as we always say on the show, it gives you that inspiration to see how far you've come, to see how much power there is to dive into something and to just learn on the fly. You can always go back and update your About Me page, or take stuff down, or rearrange stuff, or update your portfolio, whatever it may be. You can always go back. Just dive in, try something new. Don't worry that your first song, your first whatever, is not going to be a masterpiece. I can guarantee you it won't be. If it is, then you are very, very lucky, and you don't need this show anyway because you are a savant. The point is that there's no way for you to progress unless you just start. On our next episode, we have Jenny Nash. Jenny is a book coach, and she is the author of 8 books, 6 of which were published by Big 5 publishers, and she is the founder of Author Accelerator. And she comes on the show next week to to talk about not just what it means to be a book coach and the lessons that she teaches her clients, as well as the lessons that her clients have taught her, but also what it means to have a realization that maybe your talent, your true talent, is slightly different than what you initially thought it was, or what you initially intended for it to be. What it means when you're better at inspiring other people to fulfill their creative desires than necessarily fulfilling yours. If you want to find out more about Jenny, you can head to her website, jennienash.com, JennieNash.com, or find her on authoraccelerator.com, or on Twitter, she is Jenny Nash. And we'll have that all linked up at today's show notes page, as well as everything we talked about with Jeff at yourcreativepush.com/278. But that is all I've got for you today. Hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. I love you all so much. Go and get some amazing work done, and we will see you next week if you need that push again. Take care, everybody. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.